I am Jim Collison, and this is Gallup's Call to Coach, recorded on October 19th, 2021. Call to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you're listening live, love to have you join us in our chat room. There's just a link right above me up there on the live page that'll take you to that YouTube instance. Sign in in the chat room, and you can ask your questions there. If you have questions after the fact, and many of you do because you use this email address, send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube right there using the buttons below. Jan Deb is our host today. We call him Didi, so we'll refer to him that for the rest of the show. Is a market leader for Gallup and works in the area of behavioral economics for education as well as corporate institutions in consultative sales, product sales, digital sales, marketing, and strategy of Gallup's offerings in the India subcontinent. He's been instrumental in developing and growing the business of Gallup in India and Singapore. His primary area of interest entails research in the applications of behavioral economics in consulting, data analytics, as well as helping Gallup research through his sales role. He's a sales partner for Gallup for all our India accounts. Didi, welcome to Call to Coach. Great to have you.
Thanks a lot, Jim, and it's great to have the Call to Coach for India after a long time. We've been doing a great show before the COVID, but it's thanks a lot, Jim, for your time and especially at the time zone that you are in to help us launch this again for India.
Well, it's great having you, Didi. I always appreciate it, and I'm glad you're here with us. I did fail to read your top 5. Let me do that really fast because the folks in the chat will want to know. So context, individualization, learner, strategic, and achiever. We have a fabulous guest who's joining us back. I think joined us a couple of years ago and back for repeat. Didi, why don't you take a second and introduce our guest for us?
Thank you so much, Jim. And ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great pleasure to introduce Vivasvan Shastri. We call him Viva lovingly. He has been a Gallup veteran in terms of getting certified with us long time back and has done some phenomenal work in this space. This is his second time with us, and I couldn't have thought of a better guest to reintroduce Call to Coach for India. Other than Viva. So he's a technology executive with over 23 years of experience, spanning both products and services. He has global experience, having led engineering and product management in Europe, China, Latin America, and India. He's an ICF certified ACC coach, and most importantly, he has been applying the Gallup Strengths Finder in the area of technology in Cisco, and he'll share his insights today. And interestingly, he's also a Lego serious play facilitator. So welcome, Viva. It's a pleasure to have you with us. I will not read out your top 5, but I'll let you share your top 5 and your first thoughts on coming back to the show.
Oh, it's great to be back on the show, right? I think it's a good way to signal that we are back, right? To be honest, right? Call to call is back. See, for me, I think COVID has been a time where we did get a lot of opportunities to use our strengths, right? For me, I am number one is context, right? So I lead with context to figure out, because we came into an uncharted territory, right? We didn't know how to react. This was the first time that we experienced a pandemic as well. So for me, context was very important, to understand history and to learn from it, right? I think only when you know your past is when you can conquer your future. So I think context was very, very important for me. For me, intellection gave me those private moments to reflect on what is working for me, what is not working for me, what is working for my team, and what is not working for my team, right? So those little moments with myself to think over, right, what I can change and what needs to be changed personally as well for my team was really helpful. For me, I'm big on learner, and right, COVID gave us this opportunity, a platform to kind of really up our skills, right? So it was like a kid in Disneyland, right? I had so many of these digital programs available to learn, right? So learner played out extremely well for me. For me, it was Maximizer as well, right? Maximizer gave me the focus and the drive on what can be better post-COVID, right? So while we were still struggling with COVID, I was always thinking of how best can we use this as an opportunity, right? Whereas the toll on human tragedy was huge, but what's the best way to make use out of it, right? So that we come even stronger, right? So I think those are brief preview of my strengths and how I really use them.
And it's so interesting to note that I lead with context as well, and and two people with context as number one will always go into the past, but we'll try not to.
Yeah.
But my first question to you is that Viva, you have been a strengths practitioner, and the whole philosophy of strengths talks about one basic concept: what is right with people, and to see to see the world through the lens of what is right rather than what is wrong, right?
Yeah.
Now, because we are in the pandemic times, and I would want to get your first thoughts around how have you seen, the whole philosophy of strengths pan out from in the technology space. First of all, before pandemic, and how have you seen that whole thing change after the pandemic, especially with managing teams remotely and the first reaction, and then we'll go deeper into it.
Yeah. So first of all, Didi, I think strengths philosophy is very strong in the techie space, right? Because I think most of the techies see this as science, right? And techies love science, right? I think for them, this is kind of the best of science and best of human psychology coming together. And that is why, right, for me, when I coach people, right, they never have any questions on Strength Finder, right? They never kind of ask me that, how did you figure this out, right? For them, it is almost like magic, right? For them, it is science coming out there to help them, right? And that is why Strengths has a huge adoption in the techie community, right? I think that for me is not a challenge at all. One of the things where Strengths helps techies is, right, that many of times techies used a lot of data points to kind of grow themselves. And what I have seen is that people who don't know their strengths, they work very hard to undermine them. Right. For example, I was just coaching a very senior architect, and he had significance number one. And for him, the problem was that, he kept getting feedback from people around him that, hey, you're too much of a showman, right? You want to do something big so that the limelight is new. So he was working very hard for 1 year to undermine significance, right? It was a raw strength for him. And since he was not aware that it was a strength, for him, he thought that it was his weakness. And he was working overtime to undermine it. And that is where, if we can make people aware of what their strengths are, right, you set them free, right? You set them free to kind of, one, be aware of who they are so that they can first filter out what is good feedback, what is the bad feedback, right? Where it could well be the case that significance need to be kind of matured in this individual's case, but you can't undermine, you cannot really stop being who you are, right? And that is one big change that I've seen. I've seen people who are not aware of their strengths, they work extremely hard to kind of undermine and underplay them, right? And which is sabotaging your own potential, right? There is no bigger disservice that you can do to yourself than undermining your own strengths. And that is one big trend that I have seen in the techie space. Pre-COVID and post-COVID, right? I think pre-COVID, people didn't focus so much on themselves, right? I think, most of the techies used to just go by life, right? I mean, things used to happen and, they used to jump careers, they used to learn technology, find cool jobs, build cool products. But I think what COVID made people do is to kind of really focus on themselves. And that is where strengths come into play, right? When you put the lens on yourselves and not be distracted by the world around you, right? So I think that was a silver lining that COVID did, wherein basically you really focus on yourself and what is working for you versus what is not working for you, right? Plus, also, since you're working from home, you had a digital record of where you spend your time, right? You had your WebEx meeting, your calendars were there. So you could really audit, where you're spending your time, where you're using your strengths. Life didn't happen to you, right? You had to design your day, right? And you got the opportunity to really design your day using your strengths. And that is where I think a lot of individuals use strengths to redesign their life, to redesign their work and how they work and how they live with their communities. Right? I think that was basically a big change that happened during the COVID phase as well. Secondly, from a manager standpoint, right, at least in the context of India, this whole thing of work from home had a certain amount of stigma associated with it, right? It was not called out, but there was almost a bias in people's head that in case you're working from home, that means you're not productive. That means you're not effective.
Yeah.
What COVID has done is it has removed that bias, right? So I think that is the one way that we will change in India, especially the techie community will change in a very big way, right? I think it was not so much the case in the US where work from home had adoption, right? Had significant adoption, but in India it was right. Almost work from home was on exception. You needed approvals to work from home, right? It was difficult to work from home full time, right? Even if you have an elderly to care for, right, or kids to take care of, it was a difficult thing, right? And a lot of people did leave the workforce because of these conditions, right? Because the flexibility was not there. Now with COVID, I think the bias has gone away, right? People are more open. Managers have realized and learned from their own experience that teams can be very effective even when they work virtually. So I think that is one big change that COVID has brought about in the way we work.
That's a very, very, two very interesting points that you mentioned is, that the bias has been removed, number one. And second is, you mentioned something very interesting. It's called, you said designing your own day.
Yeah.
Now, when you look at the, I've been, speaking with a lot of managers in the corporate space in the last year and a half, and many of them, have been telling me that, it's difficult to monitor what my teammates are doing, and as in rightly as you said, like, so there are a lot of things which is, traditionally things are in our mind that you have to see people to ensure that they're productive. But the philosophy of strengths actually allows you to do what you really are good at. Yeah. And that is where the whole, it contradicts the fact that you have to see people or micromanage people to ensure that they're doing the best of, creating the best version of themselves. Now, as we, go down to the deeper discussion of how do you, seek or create or manage high performing teams, we come to a very important point, Viva, around how have you seen, or how does the Strengths Finder allow for each individual to maximize his or her potential in different environments? Now, when I'm saying different environments, I say that, we were all working, used to a certain style of life. For example, I was traveling from airport to airport meeting clients. Now all of those meetings for me happen over a Zoom call or a Teams call or a phone call, and it's equally productive, right? It has taught us a reality that things can happen. Now, productivity is something that is dependent on what you're doing and are you naturally liking what you're doing, right? So how have you seen those changes, small changes manifest in your teams, and have you kind of observed any, performance gaps, and if yes, how have you managed them being a strengths coach?
Yeah. So I think what COVID has done is humbled many managers, right? Managers who used to believe that they need to kind of micromanage and monitor. They know that it's no longer sustainable. It's no longer feasible, right? When everyone's working from home, there is no way that you can monitor everyone. So that every manager has designed like a kind of a paradigm, what I call as freedom within a framework. That is, you define a framework with which you want your team to work with, and then you set people free, right? What I typically do with my team is basically to set priorities every Monday, saying that, guys, this is what our team is going to focus on this week, right? And then we have frequent check-ins, right? I think once a week we just check in, like, what is working for people, where they need help, stuff that they love, right? I think one very simple question you can ask our employees is that, what is it that you loved in the last week, right? What is it that you love doing, right? What is it that you loathe doing, right? What happened that kind of really ticked you off or drained you, right? And then you realize where their strengths are, and then you go to supply more and more activities or work which is aligned to what they love. See where you can provide some relief when it comes to load, right? It's not that you can completely remove the load away, but can you kind of partner them with somebody else in the team for whom that load could be allowed, right? So asking these two very simple questions: what did you love, what did you loathe, right? Making sure that people are aligned on priorities, right? I think coming back to what Gallup says, right, that I think the first pain point every leader has to solve is that there should be absolute clarity in terms of what are key expectations from work, right? If you ask people that, do you really know what is expected from you at work? Like many people will give an iffy answer that, yes, I'm sure 60%, like, but the rest is a gray zone, and I like, priorities keep changing. So I'm trying to figure it out myself as well. But I think if you can provide clarity as much as possible, right? So what I do is that I just put on the WebEx chat with my team, I just put that, folks, these are the top 3 priorities for us as a team, right? As a leadership team. So that way, basically, you have those clear priorities set out, and then I check in. I mean, and plus I have moved to audio calls. Actually, one of the things my intellection helped me is that for short conversations, you don't need to set up a WebEx meeting. You don't have to block people's calendar for 30 minutes or an hour, right? Just call them, and those are far efficient ways because you will stay to the point. There is more of a human connection, just audio as well, right? So just have short audio calls, and then basically you can use them to check in that, hey, what is working for you? Do you need any help? 2-3 questions if a leader learns to ask, right? One is, what did you love? What did you loathe? And where do you need help? If you can just keep asking these 3 questions to your employees, you will be fine, right? You don't need to do anything dramatically different.
Absolutely. And, the whole point around making this efficient through StrengthsFinder is asking the right questions, right? How do you move into conversation-based coaching as managers? And as Gallup research has shown that, employees are looking at their managers more as mentors or coaches rather than bosses, right?
Yeah.
And the StrengthsFinder allows them to, do that. Viva, just because you excuse me, you belong to the domain of technology, and recently one of my clients from the technology space sent us a very nice note around how he has seen strengths change in his company, and he shared a lot of data points around the impact the StrengthsFinder had on overall company efficiency. And one of the points that he mentions is that supervisors have learned the art of listening more than lecturing through StrengthsFinder.
Yeah.
And the second point that he mentioned is managers are no more micromanagers, but they've come up with a coaching mentality. Instead of answering questions, the leadership now encourages discussions by asking good questions. Yeah. So I would want you to draw some insights on these, on these points. Have you seen any, in your experience in Cisco?
Yeah. So the first thing, the moment you focus on strengths, it will cue you to listen more because you're trying to identify what is working for a person, right? What is giving them the motivation, the inspiration. So you will go into a default listening mode the moment you focus on strengths, right? Because those strength finders and reports will give you strengths, but you're looking for how people are actually living them out, right? So you will get into the listening mode the moment you have the strength orientation, right? You will be cued in a way. Strengths kind of cues you in to listen more for sure, right? That is the one part basically. So you will be a far better listener. Secondly, the assumption that many leaders have, and so here you have to keep in mind that in the technology space, many of the people who become managers don't become managers because they have great potential to become a manager, but they become managers because they were absolutely great at technology, right? They build some good product, so they have no they have no tool set, they have no mindset to be a leader, right? They still come from the tech space, right? And so that is where strengths does give you a good framework and also humbles you to understand that individuals will not be completely well-rounded and balanced, right? As leaders, you expect that every individual in your team will be completely well-rounded, they'll be balanced, they'll be equal. What strengths really makes you understand is that people will have edges, and we want people to have those edges because that is what really makes them unique. And you as a leader have to focus on the team being well-rounded, right? So I think it is a little bit of a humbling experience for leaders. They for sure will listen more. For sure, they will realize that it is very unreasonable to expect everyone to be well-rounded, right? Whereas in the technology space, you can judge people on the technical expertise and can expect that everyone has a certain level of skills. Yeah. But right, you will realize that there is more than just skills that an individual has on your team.
Great. This has been a very, very deep conversation to start off with around Viva, your experience of coaching people and understanding our science is so very helpful for us. Jim, you have any questions to ask Viva, from your experience of, having this so long, having seen this for so long?
Yeah, Viva, let me ask you, as we think about teams and team collaboration, there's one thing about a manager becoming a coach and coaching teams, but what have you seen work in getting collaboration to work? We call it the power of two inside of teams with CliftonStrengths. So getting those teams to kind of come together on their own without necessarily having to have the manager at the front all the time doing that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
See, at work, Jim, right? I think there are things that we have to do which we loathe, right? Which we don't really enjoy much.
Mhm.
And that is what drives disengagement. That is what consumes a lot of energy. That is what makes us very skeptical about work. If we can empower our teams to find someone else on the team for whom that load could be a thing they love, right? That itself can be a very liberating experience for people, right? So that is one, and then you don't need to supervise or make the connections, right? And for me, I do rituals wherein we call out strengths, right? I think people believe in their strengths more when they hear it from other people, right? It's an unfortunate thing, but it is true, right?
Yeah.
You can give them a report and they will say, yes, yeah, this looks okay. But when they hear it from someone else, right, I think they really come to believe in it. So I do a ritual in my team where we call out the strengths of each one of them, right? And at times there are simple things, right? Somebody loves to work on an Excel, right? They geek out on macros, right? The moment you have to create a complex pivot, you can engage them, right? And for them, that is the best thing that could happen to them at work. So just talking about strengths and then calling out the strengths of every individual, right? People are pleasantly surprised about the compliments they get around their strengths, right? Because since strengths are so natural to you, you may not think that it is something big or great that you're doing, but when somebody else recognizes it, like those glimpses of excellence that we talk about, right? Right, when people identify those glimpses of excellence and when they call it out, I think that is the moment where people really will latch on to the strength. So doing a simple exercise within your team to just call out the strengths that you have seen in action, and don't wait for a manager to call it out, right? I think frequently there's an expectation that, hey, you need to be a leader to call it out, or it has to be, say, some kind of a recognition that has to go along with the strength in action, right? But you can just acknowledge it that, hey, I saw you doing this and it was just amazing, right? For me, it was something just amazing, right? And you don't have to identify the strength. You don't need the language. You don't need the lens. You can just call out the action and appreciate the action. That itself goes a very big way.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Lisa asked, and Viva, I'll throw this to you as well. So from the chat room, how do you incorporate design thinking into your coaching and workshops? And
oh yes,
we by the way, we would do this with our high school students in our internship programs, bringing them in, getting them, because they were doing software, design and development, and in design thinking, I think gives you a good opportunity. I won't spoil. I'm going to have you say it first, and then I'll tell you kind of how we did that. But Viva, any thoughts on that? You want to add to that?
No. So for me, I'm a design thinker at heart first, right? Actually, I first started my design thinking journey, and then I went into coaching. And I think there's a very popular book called as The Positive Intelligence Today, which is doing the round in the coaching community. And that book is a great example of using design thinking for coaching, right? It is in fact a manual for using design thinking for coaching, where you lead with empathy, right? Where you really first you need to empathize with yourself, right? Then you have to empathize with your teams, right? And that is where coaching begins, right? You're not trying to sympathize, you're not trying to offer solutions, but you first step, it begins with just empathy building. Once you have built empathy, then you will build awareness of what is it that you want to solve for, right? Like, that comes to the second phase of design thinking. And once you have a contract with the client, right, that, hey, this is what together we'll try to solve for. And that is where you can really branch out and look at all the options that you have. You can get into this beautiful exploration phase where you can come up with a zillion ideas. You can idea bomb, right, if you will, right? You can come up with as many ideas to which, right? And then finally, towards the end of the coaching conversation, right, you will have an agreement to prototype something, right? That you first begin the coaching conversation with empathy. You get a contract with your client, basically in terms of what you want to solve for. You use the tools of design thinking to jointly explore with the client on what they they would be willing to try out. And lastly, you end the coaching conversation with a pilot that they will do, right? So it kind of very neatly fits into the ICF framework as well. If you really look at design thinking, the ICF framework, it kind of very neatly flows in. So for me, the journey to be a coach was kind of really helped because I was a design thinker, right? Because a lot of these tools I had access to way before.
We have an individual development plan and built inside kind of our methodology and the teaching that we do. And if you actually superimpose design thinking on top of the individual development plan, come up with a goal, work through your reports, pull some things out. Those are your statements, right? Kind of create. I want to prototype, and the prototype is really just trying this theme. Like, okay, what could I do to insert this theme in here or these combination of themes? And so I love that design thinking question. I think there's so many places that fits in so well. So thanks for answering that. Didi, I didn't want to hijack it. What else do you have?
No, absolutely. It was a beautiful question, and absolutely relevant to what Viva was doing. Now, Viva, I'll just go into a very simple discussion around the fact that when you look at strengths and its application, there are two stages to it. One is a mature stage discussion. Say, for example, we have been all practicing into it, and the toughest stage, according to me, is the stage where you have people and you're making them aware of it at the very beginning. And here I'll bring into I was reading this book by Paddy Upton, who was it's India, and I have to bring in the cricket reference. Paddy Upton was has been one of the best performance coaches in cricket, and he was India's performance coach when it won the Cricket World Cup in 2011, and has been associated with also a number of IPL teams. He wrote a beautiful book called The Barefoot Coach, and as I was reading through it, chapter 5 is a chapter which says playing to its strengths, and I was reading it and I was like, wow. And then I found that he mentions Gallup and how he has kind of applied the philosophy of Gallup around how do you maximize what is right with you rather than what is wrong with you. And in that chapter, he talks about the fact that when it comes to focusing on strengths versus weakness, if we all go back to our childhood, and if you just pause and observe, and even some of us who are parents, look at things in a way that if your child has got a report card, the first thing that comes to your mind is where he or she has got not the highest marks, but the relatively lower marks, right? But the strengths finder tells you is that if somebody is good in English, why not focus there? That's where you maximize, right?
Yeah.
So when you encounter people for the first time, right? Now I know there are certain organizations which have become very, very mature. But people, for them to understand and make them aware, right? It's a psychology shift.
Yeah.
How do you do that for the first time? And how have you seen that change? And has it matured with time?
So I think the first thing, right, the first thing you can do as a coach, right, to bring into strengths is to talk about the peak experiences of clients, right? So I always ask a client that, can you tell me a 5-minute story of what your peak experience was? Like, what was your best day at work, or what was the most memorable day in your life? And then I try to look for evidences of strengths, right? And that is where, right, I think to make people appreciate their strengths, I think they have to appreciate from their own experience. Right, like while there is science and we have tons of white papers, and there is this great book by Paddy Upton where he talks about how strengths help the Indian cricket team win the World Cup. But I think you need to really experience it yourself to believe in strengths. So I always start with the peak experience, right? I just invite the client to tell me a 5-minute story. Like, tell me about your best day at work, and therein where I look for evidences of strengths. And once I have that story, right, then I revisit the story 5 times, right? Your top 5 strengths are there. So we go and look for evidences on how this strength helped out. So I think talking about your peak experiences, talking about that is one way for a person to really realize your strength, because that is when you will come to know that to succeed, you have only one ammunition. Your superpower are your strengths.
Yes.
It's true that there is a fixation with weaknesses because the environment cues us in, right? Everyone
Yes.
talks about our weaknesses, right? And that is why we have also built a natural habit that we will also talk about it. But when we can reflect on our peak experiences, that is when, we'll really focus on our strengths. So just talking about your peak experiences, remembering your peak experiences and what strengths played out, right? Many often people will attribute their own peak experiences to luck, right? And luck does play a part. Nobody is denying it. But at least I have seen that when people talk about their peak experiences, from the top 5 strengths in Strength Finder, they will at least find 3 or 4, right? They will
Absolutely.
find 3 or 4 strengths in action. They will find strengths actually combining together, right, to giving them momentum to succeed, right? So I think getting people to talk about their peak experiences is by far the best way for them to really appreciate their strengths, right? I think that is the simplest tool that is available to any coach, right? And a great starting point, right, to introduce strengths as well.
Absolutely, very, very well articulated, Viva. Because when you're talking about peak experiences, you're automatically shifting the direction from negativity to positivity.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Now, when Gallup studied, its research on managers from hundreds of organizations around the world, it also talked about two basic flaws, or flawed assumptions about people. Is that each person can learn to be competent in almost anything, right? Each person's greatest room for growth is in his or her area of greatest weakness.
Yeah.
Which is what beautifully this your Paddy Upton mentioned in his chapter on Gallup strengths, is the fact that he says that if I spend 10,000 hours on learning the piano, with my unfortunate lack of natural musical talent, I might become good, but will still not be a great concert pianist, right?
Yeah.
Which is what one of our famous experiments on speed reading at the University of Nebraska also talked about. When you do an experiment on speed reading with people who are naturally good readers, the outcome is exponential, right?
Yeah.
So now when we shift the discussion from to teams and maximizing teams and producing high performing teams, in each team you will have people with complementary talents. Talent is the Gallup word talent, which we're referring to here. Now, I would want you to share some experience of, how have you seen the group or the team output getting maximized because of it? Because you mentioned about somebody, crunching the data in Excel, and when somebody talks good about him or her, they feel good about it, right? So in a team, you will have people say, there are 5-6 people in a team. I'm just, for simplicity's sake, each one will bring a complementary talent or strength into it, right?
Yeah.
The first thing is, once you take the assessment, or you have you have been coached by people, you are aware of it. So there were times when you were doing things subconsciously, but now you're doing things consciously. Now, as a people manager managing a high performing team, or having an objective of creating a high performing team, how have you, number one, allowed those differences to remain different and thus getting maximized? And how have you also allowed people to accept the fact that each one is different, and thus bring in a complementary sense of teamwork that allows you to get a maximum output?
Yeah. So I'll just add one more flaw, right? I think Paddy Upton does well in highlighting the flaws that most managers have. I think the technology space, there is one more flaw that we assume that if you're great at technology, hence you will become a great leader, right? And a lot of people get promoted to leadership positions just because they did awesome with a product or a tech, right? So I think that is one more flaw which you really have to watch out for as well. In the technology space, I think it is more. Now, to give you an example of how you can really use strengths to improve team productivity, right? I think, right, I'll share my own example. I use the concept of talent domains, right? If you really understand which domain an individual is really strong on, then you can provide more opportunities to that individual to kind of exercise or play within that domain, right? For example, I have an individual in my team who's very high on maximizer, very high on futuristic, right? And then we had this competition within our teams and hackathon, right? And being in the engineering space, we have a lot of introverts, right? Like people who have great ideas, but they will never share their idea. They're kind of whenever a big competition is announced with the prize, they may not want to participate in it because they're not not really comfortable. Now, this guy was a very strong influencer, uh, extremely strong on intellection. And so I made him in charge of kind of organizing the troop, right? To providing support to the people who have ideas but want some support, right? And today in my team, we we are a very small team, but we had the most number of entries for my team into the hackathon competition. So you can focus on talent domains and whatever initiatives that you have within your team, right? You can kind of direct them to individuals who are very strong in those domains, right? For for example, influencing is very one very strong domain. So you want to innovate, right? Then you have intellection, right? And the strategic thinking domain is a very, very strong domain. So you can use the concept of talent domains as well, right? Move beyond strengths and see which domain is powerful, and then align your initiatives and activities along those domains and placing individuals. And that is a very easy way, right, for even a smaller team to do something which is far disproportionate to the size, right? I'm a very small team, but I had a large number of ideas because I had one individual who was very high on influencing, very high on strategic thinking. He was put in charge of leading the entire troop, right? And that is very, very simple things. You don't have to do anything, you have to just make them in charge.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now, when we talk about managers, playing the role of mentors or coaches, Gallup in its research identified the fact that there are 5 key conversations that managers need to have with employees regularly, right? It talks about role and relationship, quick connect, check-in, developmental coaching, progress to goals. Now, Viva, one question from me is that at the end of the day, we are, when you look at the teams that you have managed or the teams you have overseen being managed, what happens or how have you navigated when somebody has not reached his or her goal, to their potential, to their natural potential? How have you, have you encountered any such, of course you would have, but I would want you to share a few insights around how have you allowed people to reach whatever their goal is, because there might be people with different roles in the organization, right? uh, so if you see that this person is not being able to use his or her talent, or not being able to reach the goal, the intended goal, right? How have you allowed that that person to reach that? Any specific strategies that you have adopted, both at an individual level and also at a team level, because the teams will also have goals, right? So I would want to hear from you around that.
Yeah, so step one, I think I try to empathize with an individual, right? Because I think times you have to understand what people's goals are, and right, at times they themselves are not clear about what their goals are. So I think you begin with empathy, right? And for me, my favorite questions are love, loathe, right? What did you love? What did you loathe? And right, what do you need? And somewhere in the needs, you will find that in case they have strengths which they are not finding opportunities to utilize, right? Because they may not be clear about goals, right? People don't know what their goals are, let's be honest, right? And it is very difficult. But what we can do as leaders is, if we can get them to use their strengths, right, on a consistent basis, they will eventually find their purpose. And once they find their purpose, they will identify what goals they want. So I don't think you should start with a goal. Yes, there are business has a goal, right? Most individuals will not have a goal, right? They will have a purpose, right? And if we can give enough of an opportunity for people to use their strengths, they will find their purpose. Once they find their purpose, then eventually the goals will be discovered as well. So I think you have to keep that in mind, right? Not the role of a leader, of a coach, to prescribe goals. Yes, there are business goals which a team is accountable for, right? But purely from an individual basis, I mean, they are just not a corporate entity, right? They just don't work. They have a life beyond work as well. There's a community that they live in as well, right? Which feeds into a lot of them. So as long as you can help them find their purpose somewhere along the way, right? See, work which does not find expression for the soul is torture, right? So how can you,
absolutely,
right? How can you get someone to really express what they love about, right? I think there was a lady in my team whose dream was to be an RJ, right? And she became an RJ, and then she came to the technology center space, right? And she always loved being an RJ, right? So I mean, whenever there is a video to be made or wherever there is a demo to be given, we will invite her in, and for her, that's the greatest moment, right? It's not the actual work that you do, right? So people have needs which are not met, right? And at times it is difficult for classical or traditional work to meet all their needs. But there is enough and more opportunity, right? There is so much going on at work today, right? Right, that you can give them that opportunity to express their soul, right? And that is what we have to do as leaders: give them more and more opportunities where they can express themselves, and they will find a way. They will find a way, right? We are just enablers, right? And we can provide the
Yeah.
guardrails like along the way, so that they don't do something which really damages their career along the way. But as long as you define that framework and then set people free within the framework, right, they will find their purpose. Once they find their purpose, they will find a goal. And most companies have enough opportunities within, right? At least like Cisco, where I work, there are enough and more opportunities to express your soul, right? I think there are so much of rotation opportunities within as well. But as long as leaders can provide that framework where people are free to express their soul, to live their strengths, they will eventually find their way. They will eventually find their purpose, and they will eventually find their goals as well. I don't prescribe goals for individual, right?
Beautiful.
I will help them find their way. That's all.
Beautiful. Thank you. Before I move into my last segment of questions, but we have some very, very nice questions that are coming in, Viva. I'll take a couple of them. Lisa asks the fact that, you talked a lot about empathy. So where is that in your top 34? And what strengths do you use, to approximate it? Okay.
No, so actually, Lisa, this is a very good question, right? And I may be opening a landmine. It is in my bottom 5. But but how I empathize is with my maximizer, to be honest, right? So to be the best leader I can be, right? For me to maximize, to raise the bar, I have to really understand my people. And that is what gets me to empathize. And the same thing, right? So to be honest, it is coming from a different place. To naturally empathize is not in my top 10, it is in my bottom 5. But the way I empathize is to use my maximizer. It also provides me a lot of food for thought for my intellection, which is why I love this, right? It gives me a lot of input, right? That I can think about as well, right? And that is the beauty of strengths, right? I think this is perfect question. See, to do something that need not be in your top 5.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, right. It can be in your bottom 5, and you can still do it if you can figure out an algorithm to do it. So I use my maximizer, right? I use this as a way to feed my intellection, right? It helps me to build context, right? To get a better understanding of people, the business situation also is, right? And that is for me, right? So I do empathize, but empathy is not in my top 5.
I think there's another very, very nice question, which comes from what you said at the very beginning around the fact that, technology people or techies trust the science, right? And they need a science around, and then reasoning and a logic around everything. So the question is that, when you speak with them, when you speak with people from the technology background who have been exposed to technology and are kind of into it, understand numbers, understand logic, do they expect measurable success? And if so, how do you kind of show it to them?
For me, measurable success for techies is what they can experience, right? It's not a KPI. So you have to keep one thing in mind, right? When techies look, they look for experience. Can they experience it themselves, right? It's not what an algorithm tells them. It is not what a KPI or an MBO for a business is. It should be something that they can experience. It is not what a slide says. It is what the heart feels. So as long as by using their strengths, they get energized, right? They get motivated, they will start to believe the science, right? So techies are very scientific. They will only go by experience. No matter what amount of white papers you show them, no matter what amount of videos you show them, it's not going to work. But simple thing you can do as a coach is use one strength and get a techie to experience it. For them, those moments of experiences are their measures of success, right? And if you can do that on a consistent basis, right, techies will fall for, see, one great part about technology industry is that they are ready to prototype anything, right? They're ready to experiment, right? I mean, you're building code every day, you're shipping code every day. So you don't mind giving something a chance. Now, in that one opportunity you get as a strengths coach, if you can really get them to experience the power of strengths, your job is done. Right?
Absolutely.
I mean, in fact, beyond the name it and claim it, right? I have so many of people that I coach. They are strength junkies now. They are they keep breeding, uh, right, about strength. So just provide them those experiences. You don't need a lot of gyan, you don't need a lot of white papers, you don't need a lot of things. Focus on the experiences that you can create for them using strengths.
Absolutely, absolutely. Jim, thoughts from your end before I move into the last segment?
No, let's go. We're going to run out of time if we're not careful. So let's go into that last segment, Didi.
Okay. So, Viva, you mentioned around the fact that there is a life, we talk about life beyond work. And this pandemic has taught us the importance of well-being, right? We've seen people burn out. Now, what StrengthsFinder does is that if you are if you are working in the field that you naturally are good at, it allows you to maximize not only your potential, your performance, but also your life, right? I want you to touch upon this whole, well-being is something which is now absolutely a core focus of area for people across the world. And how have you seen people who have been able to work through their domain of strengths and have been able to do things that they really like and love, navigate the adverse effects of well-being and have been able to manage their life in a positive way?
So one good way to focus on wellness using your strengths is don't use it for yourself, but use your strengths in the service of others, right? And COVID has provided us with a fantastic opportunity, with a fantastic platform to use our strengths in the service of others. If you're good at something, if something really drives you, really energizes you, don't use your magic just for yourself, right? Use your magic for everyone around you, right? I think that is one short way of taking care of your own well-being as well, right? Use your strengths for the service of others. I think that is one thing. Secondly, use your strength. Strength has been only applied in the space of career development, right? People only use it for career progression, making impact at work. Use your strengths to improve your own financial well-being. And that is what I am trying to do, right? To be honest, I'm a techie guy, right? I don't really know a lot about the finance world, but I have intellection, right? I have maximizer, right? I have learner. So I'm using my learner that how can I use my strengths to improve my financial well-being, right? How can I use my strengths for the benefit of society? And that is where my community can benefit because of my strengths, right? How can I use my strengths to help the family around me, right? My own friends, my social circle, right? How might I help them, right? So, right, I think it is using our strengths for the service of others is one way. Using our strengths in areas where we have not applied, right? As Gallup has said that well-being is not only about career, right? Career is only one part of it, right? There is physical well-being, right? How can you use your strengths to improve your physical state of being as well, right?
Yes.
I think so. Use it for all the areas. Don't don't limit your strengths to only one area, that is self and career. We have to broaden the application of strengths beyond the self and career to far more areas, and that is where you will find your own well-being and you can help others find their well-being as well.
Thank you. It's a very,
So
very
by the way, right, I mean, since you asked me on well-being, what I've done for my team is I have combined both the Gallup's framework of well-being and plus Lego serious play. So we did workshop within my teams, right, where we asked team to build Lego models, right? We first spoke about physical well-being, right? That build a model about how you feel today, right? And where the future state would be, right? Then you change your model kind of where you want to be. And then you talk about how you will use your strengths to move from where you are to where you want to be. So I've done some experiments on well-being plus Lego serious play, right? But I think that is where use your strengths for the service of others and then broaden your application of strengths is, I think, two short ways of using it, especially during the COVID times that we are.
Very, very useful advice for people listening to this. Viva, one last question from my end around what I wanted to ask you today was the fact that when you look at the philosophy of strengths in a more philosophical way, right, or at a very basic way. So when I took Strengths Finder and I was, just about to join Gallup, and I was in XLRI, and when I was coached, I started asking, how do you know so much about myself, right? And people are doing things subconsciously, but now you're doing things consciously. So my two-pronged question to you is, before we close this, and we'll take a few questions from the chat if there are, is, how have you seen what, once you have interacted with the people or managed people in teams, once they're aware of their potential and the people they are working with. So basically, it's you and your stakeholders. Your stakeholders can be your immediate team members or your broader team members. So once that awareness seeps in, how have you seen those manifest? And have you also seen certain kinds of conflicts that happen between team members because of not being aware? So for example, if somebody has high deliberative is a strength or talent which talks about you will think through the pros and cons before acting. If I'm aware that Jim has very high deliberative, and if I've sent an email to Jim and I know that he will respond, but if I'm not aware, I might think that why is he not responding? Am I not being important? Am I being not? But if I'm aware that he is deliberative, he will respond once he has the answers. Yeah. It reduces friction within teams. So have you seen a reduction in conflicts? And also my first question was how have you seen the transition of self-awareness move from individuals to teams?
Yeah, so two-part answer. I think strengths does have a spiritual edge to it, right? A spiritual dimension or a matrix to it as well, right? So the first thing is, if you're not aware of your strengths, you will tend to be very judgmental because you will always compare people around you with who you are, right? I mean, and you play the role of a judge, you play the role of a jury, and that leads to a lot of conflict. You seek uniformity. You will try to make the world very much like who you are, right? Once you understand strengths, right, I think you will have the spiritual awareness that both you are different as well as people around you are different, right? And it's okay to be in this world where everyone is different, right? It is perfectly normal to be, right? And that itself reduces a lot of conflict, right? Your judge basically takes a back seat, and basically you lead from the point that, hey, we don't seek uniformity, right? But we can be one even without being the same, right? Even while being different, we can still be this one community. We can still be the one team. We can still be the one family. We can still be the one country. We can still be the one world, right? So, right, I think it makes you more inclusive. It makes you far more appreciative of people are. It forces you to take a back seat to kind of make sense of who people are, right? You may not agree with them completely, but at least you'll appreciate them a lot more, right? Secondly, you realize that people have different potentials and the ways that they will get there is very different. The way that works for me is not the way that will work with you. And right at Cisco, we have a very nice tagline for this, right? Be you with us, right? Right? When you work for Cisco, you don't have to stop being who you are, but you can still be with us, right? And that is how strengths can provide a foundation for truly building an inclusive world, right? Here in India, there is a thing called as Tattvamasi, right? That right, which is loosely like I am and you am, both of us are very similar, right? We may behave differently, we have very different strengths, but we are equally good, right? And I see what is great in you, right? When you do Namaste in India, right, I think it means that I see the divinity in you, right? And strengths forces us to look at people far bigger than what they really are today. It gives us that framework to say that, yes, this individual may be behaving in this way, but that potential could be far, far bigger. And it forces us to see that bigger potential. And once we see that potential, we will we will behave far differently, right? Exactly. We will be far less, we'll be far less judgmental about what they are today, but we will focus on what they can be, right? And we will see ourselves as an enabler to help them to become what they want to be, right? So I think that is where strengths can provide the spiritual foundation of building an inclusive world, because it has scope to really make people aware of how they are different. It helps people to be very aware of that other people can be different, right, and still appreciate their uniqueness, right? So I think there is a spiritual foundation to strengths as well. And once you do that, once you don't seek for uniformity, once you don't seek to be the judge and the jury trying to make everyone the same, that will provide you the space to really appreciate the potential of everyone. See people bigger than who they are. And once you can do that, right, I think your approach will change. So yes, I think strengths has a very spiritual foundation as well, Devi.
Thank you. This is viewed as an I don't have words to express the gratitude around how you have technically as well as conceptually explained this, and made it so simpler for people who are listening to it and will eventually listen to it in the recorded version. So I think, Jim, that's all from my end. If there are any questions, we'll be happy to take. But it has been really, really wonderful to hear from Viva around how he has applied things at a granular level in the technology space world.
Yeah, exciting to be back in India. I forgot
absolutely
how much
absolutely.
I missed hanging out with you guys, and it's always super late in the night for me. But kind of missed hearing from India, and so it's just been great to hear the stories and hear you guys talk, and I've just really enjoyed the time. Didi, a couple questions came in around an example. So Dr. Priscilla Prasath asked this question about small firms and companies how can they afford CliftonStrengths and an assessment in India? Because there's a price consideration. She had some questions, and as well as there was another question. Preeti had asked some questions about using it in institutions. I had given him the advice of, really for those, contact us. But Didi, how do you want to? Can you talk about that just in a minute or two?
So basically, Jim, I get this question almost every day around not just the cost around it, but more importantly, people ask me, how is StrengthsFinder different or better than the other assessments which are there, right? So I think that if you don't have a belief around this, so it's like how if you believe that the glass is half empty, you will go in that direction. If you want to see that the glass is half full, you will go in that direction. So once the belief system is there, I think then we can navigate. Of course, there's a cost component to it, so I don't think this is the right platform to talk about it. But the whole point is, it is you have to have a belief system to apply this. If you don't have that, you can't apply this, irrespective of whatever the cost is, right? And of course, there are different ways of of different versions of the StrengthsFinder. Some people might want to take the top 5 and eventually migrate to the all 34. But now mostly all of our clients use the all 34 because of the benefits associated with it. I'll be happy to take those questions offline. And
so I'll just chip in, Didi, right? I'll just share my experience, right? I'll just share. See, I think when it comes to cost, right, I think for me, cost has never been the issue, right? Because I have very young engineers, right, who are just about to starting their career, and they themselves are ready to pay the amount to know their strengths. So I have never seen cost to be an issue, because I think the value that you get from it is tremendous. That is one, right? Secondly, when it comes to, hey, there are so many tools, and why should I pick Gallup? I think it's just not the tool and the science behind it, but I think the tool set that follows the assessment, right? I think Gallup by far has the best tool set on what to do with your strengths report.
Yeah,
right. And
exactly.
for me, for me, the tool set that I acquired, once I did my coaching certification, right, I think that is a rich mine, a gold mine of tool set available on what you can do post it, right? So I think those are the two considerations that you should keep in mind when you select, when you take any tool or any framework, right? There could be free tools also available, right? I've seen some free tools also available right out there, but pick something which is backed by science, right? Because people will question you on it, especially in the technology space. I think engineers are very smart, right? They'll figure it out. So I think have a tool which is backed by science, and secondly, which has which organization has the best framework post the assessment to help someone to reach their potential, right? And I think Gallup is way ahead of others when it comes to the tool set, in my personal experience.
And also the point is, Jim, just one adding one last point is the fact that when you look at the technical report of the Strengths Finder, you understand the deep research that has gone behind it. So, a lot of my clients request for it, and I explain the technical report behind, how the Strengths Finder has gone. Because Viva, I said, people will ask you questions. There has to be a rationale behind it. And trust me, I have interacted with so many thousands of people now, thousands of people. Every person, once they've seen the report, it's how do you know so much about myself? It's as unique as your fingerprint, right? It's 1 in 33 million. The probability that you will have your top 5 is, in the same order. So there's a science behind it. There's a power behind it. Then most importantly, there is positivity behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you believe in all of these, you should, tread that path.
Didi, is it okay if you give your email address if folks want to contact you?
Absolutely, Jim. So should I just write it down here?
I'll just say it. Dipanjan Deb _Deb at Gallup.com. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did get it right.
I got it right. So, and if you can't remember that, send us an email, coaching@Gallup.com, and we'll get that forwarded over to Didi as well. So great job, gentlemen. Thanks for coming out tonight. Thanks for being a part of this. You guys hang tight for me 1 second. We'll close it up with the chat room here. And thanks to everybody who came out. We had a couple handfuls here, and it's always nice to be, whether you're listening from the West Coast of the United States or you're listening from India or Australia. We appreciate you coming out during this time zone. A couple reminders. If you want to take advantage of all the opportunities that we have, and we mentioned a lot of them, they're available on our website. Head out to gallup.com/CliftonStrengths. And you can actually sign up now for the Clifton Strengths Insight newsletter at the very bottom of the page if you want to get a monthly newsletter from us. If you're interested in coaching, master coaching, or want to become a Gallup certified strengths coach, you can send us that email. Again, coaching@gallup.com. Follow these events. And Didi, we got to do more of these. Can't be a one and done. So we'll be doing more.
And thank you, Jim.
Yeah, we'll be doing more. You can follow us on Eventbrite for that, gallup.eventbrite.com. Every time I post a new one for India or anywhere around the world, you'll get notified of that and be able to join us live for those, or just subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Just search Call to Coach, and you can get these when they're done. It's not always convenient to listen to them live, but they're more fun live. Let's just be honest with that. We want to thank you for listening this evening, this morning, this afternoon, whatever time zone you're in. Thanks for coming out. You guys hang tight for me for the live audience. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.